Second Lieutenant John George crouched on a ridge overlooking the Hukawng Valley, Burma, March 14th, 1944. 0627 hours. The Winchester Model 70 rested against moss-covered rock, barrel aimed toward a trail 340 yards below where Japanese patrols moved at dawn. 28 years old, Illinois state champion at 23, Guadalcanal, 11 Japanese snipers killed in 4 days with 12 shots. Burma, 28 days carrying the rifle through jungle so dense visibility never exceeded 50 yards, 0 shots fired. The Winchester weighed 8 pounds 14 ounces, lighter than Guadalcanal. George had removed the walnut stock, replaced it with synthetic polymer. The modification saved 14 ounces. His rucksack weighed 60 pounds. Ammunition, 10 days of rations, water, poncho, entrenching tool. Every ounce mattered when you marched 20 miles per day through vertical terrain where trails disappeared into mud and men collapsed from malaria as often as enemy fire. But the rifle remained silent. On Guadalcanal, other officers had called the Winchester a toy, mail-order sweetheart, sporting rifle with a civilian scope, while real soldiers carried Garands. George proved them wrong. 11 enemy snipers, 4 days, 12 rounds. Now in Burma with Merrill's Marauders, George carried 8 pounds 14 ounces of reputation he couldn't use. Burma jungle had no static bunkers, no clear sightlines through coconut groves, no time for 240-yard precision shots through a Weaver 330C scope while Japanese infantry maneuvered at knife-fighting distance. Burma had mobile warfare, 20-mile forced marches, ambushes at 30 yards, followed by immediate withdrawal. No place for a bolt-action rifle when volume of fire determined who walked away. George would discover why the rifle that dominated Guadalcanal failed in Burma, and when he finally fired, each shot would cost something the body count never measured. 28 days earlier, February 15th, 1944, George arrived in India after 10 months stateside. Fort Benning, Georgia, officer training, teaching Guadalcanal lessons to men who'd never heard a shot fired in anger, how to identify Japanese snipers in trees, how to construct elevated firing positions, how to work a boat action without losing sight picture through magnified optics. Now he joined the 5,307th Composite Unit, no official designation. The men called themselves Galahad, or Merrill's Marauders, after their commander, Brigadier General Frank Merrill. The mission was impossible by conventional assessment. March 500 miles through northern Burma, terrain Japanese commanders considered impassable for forces larger than company strength. No artillery support, no motorized transport, no established supply lines. 3,000 men, pack mules, and whatever they could carry. Objective, capture Myitkyina airfield. The airfield was critical for Allied supply routes into China. Japanese forces controlled it with approximately 4,000 troops dug into defensive positions that had never been tested by frontal assault. George examined the Winchester in the Dialali barracks. The rifle had survived Guadalcanal, obsessive cleaning after immersion in a water-filled crater during a mortar barrage, cosmoline and gun oil, patches run through the barrel until they emerged white. But Burma would be different. Patrols lasting weeks, each soldier carrying 60 pounds of gear, rations for 10 days, ammunition, water, personal equipment. George calculated weight. Winchester Model 70 with walnut stock, 9 pounds 12 ounces. Weaver 330C scope, 12 ounces. Total, 10 pounds 8 ounces. The M1 Garand other men carried weighed 9 pounds 8 ounces empty. Garand was semi-automatic, 8-round on-block clip. Winchester was bolt action, 5-round internal magazine. Garand was lighter and delivered higher volume of fire in close combat. George found synthetic stock material in a supply depot, experimental polymer reinforced with fiberglass. Weight, 1 pound 2 ounces versus 2 pounds for walnut. Saved 14 ounces. George installed the synthetic stock, adjusted eye relief on the scope, test-fired 20 rounds at a makeshift range, 4-inch groups at 300 yards. Acceptable degradation for significant weight reduction. Final rifle weight, 8 pounds 14 ounces. Still heavier than a Garand, but 1 pound 10 ounces lighter than before. In a 3-month patrol carrying 60 pounds through mountainous jungle, 1 pound 10 ounces meant the difference between mission capability and medical evacuation. February 24, 1944, 3,000 men began the march. George carried the Winchester, 60 rounds of .30-06 ammunition in stripper clips and 60 pounds of equipment. First week. 83 miles through jungle so steep men used ropes to descend ridges where one misstep meant 100-foot fall onto rocks that had killed 2 pack mules. Malaria cases increased daily. Temperature, 95 degrees Fahrenheit during day, 70 at night. Humidity, 85%. Rain came in sheets that turned trails into rivers and made dry ground a memory. George cleaned the Winchester every night. Cosmoline on the bolt, oilcloth wrapped around the scope. But he never fired. Combat was fleeting. Japanese patrols at 30 to 50 yards, M1 Garands responding with semi-automatic fire, movement immediately after contact to avoid counterattack. No time for bolt-action precision shooting. No static positions where a scoped rifle provided advantage. March 14th, 1944, after 19 days of marching. George had carried 8 pounds 14 ounces of rifle for 217 miles. 0 shots fired. The battalion had fought 12 times, skirmishes, ambushes, brief firefights followed by rapid withdrawal. The Winchester remained strapped to George's pack during engagements. He carried an M1 Garand as primary weapon, like every other officer. The Marauders were losing more men to disease than combat. Malaria, dysentery, typhus. Medics distributed quinine, but supplies were rationed. Some men marched with fever so severe their skin burned to touch. They continued because stopping meant evacuation, and evacuation meant missing the final objective. George's platoon, 23 men remaining from 30 original, 7 evacuated by disease, 0 by combat wounds. The Winchester remained silent. George carried 8 pounds 14 ounces of rifle, proving more useful in storage than employment. March 23rd, 1944, 06:47 hours. George's platoon reached a ridge overlooking the Tanai River. Width approximately 80 yards. Current moderate. Depth unknown but fordable based on intelligence estimates. Mission: observe Japanese movements, report via radio. Do not engage unless tactically necessary. George positioned the platoon in concealment 340 yards upstream from suspected Japanese crossing point. Thick vegetation provided cover. Sightline through a gap in trees, 412 yards to opposite bank, where trail emerged from jungle. George had binoculars, 7-power magnification, better than the Weaver scope's 2.5 power, but binoculars didn't kill. George considered possibilities. If Japanese forces crossed during daylight, the Winchester would be useful. Long-range interdiction without revealing platoon position, but probability was low. Japanese preferred night movement. 06:47 hours, George glassed the river with binoculars. Movement on opposite bank. Japanese soldiers staging for crossing. Not concealed movement, deliberate preparation. Approximately 30 to 40 men. George counted officers, 3, identifiable by katanas and binoculars. One officer was directing troops, pointing, gesturing, organizing soldiers into formation. Range, 412 yards. George lowered binoculars, retrieved the Winchester. First time in 28 days the rifle left its carrying position for potential combat employment. George chambered a round, scoped the officer directing troops. 412 yards, wind light, left to right. George adjusted 2 clicks right for windage. Officer was stationary, focused on organizing troops. Perfect target under optimal conditions. George controlled breathing. 3 seconds inhale, 2 seconds hold, trigger squeeze. Glass smooth, 3.5 pound pull. Winchester recoiled. Report cracked across the valley. 412 yards away, the Japanese officer dropped. Body fell backward. Troops scattered into cover. George worked the bolt. Spent cartridge ejected. Fresh round chambered. Scanned for secondary target. Nothing. Japanese had gone to ground. George lowered the rifle. Immediate problem. Winchester's report was distinctive, different from M1 Garand's sharp crack. Deeper, more resonant. George's platoon sergeant appeared beside him. Lieutenant, they heard that. They know approximate position. George understood. 1 shot, 1 confirmed kill, but also 1 shot, position compromise. On Guadalcanal, George operated alone. Position compromise didn't matter because he could relocate quickly without coordinating troop movement. In Burma, George commanded 30 men. Moving 30 soldiers through jungle was slow and noisy. Relocation required time the enemy could exploit. Result: Japanese aborted the river crossing. Mission success. But platoon had to relocate immediately. 2-mile march north to avoid potential Japanese response patrol. 30 men, 60 pounds each, through jungle with no trails. 2 hours of movement. George calculated cost. 1 confirmed kill purchased with 60 man-hours of march time plus potential compromise of platoon operational security. April 1944, weeks 6 through 8 of the campaign. George fired the Winchester once in March. In April, 0 times. Battalion continued advance. Miles accumulated, 400 plus. Casualties increased, not from combat, but from attrition, malaria, dysentery, exhaustion. Men marched in semi-conscious states, fever so intense some became delirious but continued moving because stopping meant being left behind with uncertain evacuation. By mid-April, battalion strength 2,200 men from 3,000 original, 800 evacuated or dead. George's platoon, 23 men remaining, 7 lost to disease, 0 to combat. Winchester remained silent. George carried 8 pounds 14 ounces of rifle that had proven deadlier in reputation than application. April 17th, second engagement. George's platoon advancing through ridge terrain when Japanese machine gun opened fire. Type 92 heavy machine gun, 7.7mm. Rate of fire 450 rounds per minute. Position, approximately 380 yards ahead on elevated ground. Pinned the platoon. M1 Garand return fire was ineffective. Range too long for accurate fire with iron sights. George identified the problem. Machine gun position had clear field of fire. Platoon couldn't advance, couldn't flank. Stalemate. George unslung the Winchester, first time in 3 weeks. Positioned behind large rock outcropping. Range 380 yards. Target, machine gun position visible through scope. George saw muzzle flash, identified gunner's approximate location. Wind, negligible. George aimed, controlled breathing, fired. Machine gun went silent. George worked bolt, chambered another round, waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Machine gun didn't resume. Kill or suppression unknown, but position was neutralized. Problem of distinctive report returned. Winchester's sound echoed across valley, different from multiple M1 Garand's firing. Corporal Williams from Ohio shouted, "Cease fire! Friendly position!" Williams thought Japanese had captured American rifle based on distinctive report. Confusion lasted 10 seconds before Sergeant clarified. Issue, Winchester sounded too different. In firefight with multiple weapons, distinctive report caused friendly confusion. George's realization. Bolt-action rifle with distinctive acoustic signature had two critical problems in mobile warfare. First, low rate of fire compromised suppressive capability. Second, distinctive report created identification confusion among friendly forces. In static positions like Guadalcanal, these problems were manageable. In mobile Burma operations, they were critical failures. May 11, 1944, final approach to Myitkyina. Battalion had marched 700+ miles. Objective, Myitkyina airfield, 50 miles ahead. Effective strength, 1,400 men from 3,000 original. George's platoon, 19 men. Winchester, 2 shots fired in 77 days. Patrol of 8 men led by George penetrated Japanese defensive perimeter. Mission, reconnaissance of approaches to airfield. Range, 12 miles beyond friendly lines. Deep penetration. Patrol discovered Japanese position, sniper in elevated location, 290 yards away, pinning American patrol from different unit. Patrol had requested support via radio. George's team was closest available response. George assessed situation. Japanese sniper operating from ridge with clear sightline to trail where American patrol was pinned. Sniper was systematically engaging targets. Range, 290 yards. Uphill shot. Wind, moderate, left to right. George had the shot, but Winchester had only 3 rounds remaining. George had fired 2 rounds, had 5-round magazine capacity, hadn't reloaded stripper clips in 3 days because he hadn't expected employment. George positioned himself. Winchester shouldered. Scope on target. Japanese sniper visible through vegetation. 3 clicks right for wind. Breathing controlled. Trigger squeeze. Winchester fired. Japanese sniper jerked, fell, body tumbled down ridge. George worked bolt. Final round chambered. Scanned for secondary target. None. Position clear. Immediate result, pinned patrol able to extract 0 casualties among rescued soldiers. George's patrol withdrew. Mission success. But Winchester now had 1 round remaining. Deep in Japanese territory, 12 miles from friendly lines, George had bolt-action rifle with single cartridge versus M1 Garand's 8-round capacity, carried by rest of patrol. Return march covered 12 miles back to friendly lines. Patrol encountered Japanese force 6 soldiers 40 yards away. Firefight erupted. M1 Garands firing semi-automatic. George fired final Winchester round. Hit or miss unknown in chaos. Dropped rifle, drew M1911 pistol, 45 caliber, 7 rounds. Pistol more useful than empty bolt-action rifle at 15-yard combat range. Patrol survived, reached friendly lines, 0 casualties. George reloaded Winchester after return with 5 fresh rounds, but lesson was complete. In 78 days, George had fired Winchester 3 times. Result, 3 confirmed or probable kills. M1 Garand in same period, George estimated 40+ rounds fired in multiple engagements. Results unknown, but volume of fire had maintained tactical initiative and kept platoon combat effective. May 17, 1944. Marauders captured Myitkyina airfield. Operation success. Strategic objective achieved. Cost 2,900 casualties from 3,000 men original strength. George's platoon, 15 men remaining. Winchester, 3 combat shots in 3 months of continuous operations against enemy forces in contested territory. George was evacuated in June, not from combat wound, but from cumulative effects of 3-month jungle operation, malaria. Weight loss, 40 pounds from 170-pound frame. Doctors at field hospital determined George needed rest. No combat operations for minimum 3 months. George's war was temporarily finished. George spent recovery time analysing equipment performance. Winchester Model 70 had killed 11 Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal. Static positions, clear sight lines, long-range precision engagement. Burma required a different weapon, semi-automatic for volume of fire, not bolt action for precision. Future warfare would be mobile. Next war, if there was one, would require M1 Garand or better, not Winchester. The rifle that had dominated Guadalcanal was obsolete in Burma mobile operations. Final Burma statistics. George achieved 3 confirmed kills with Winchester, unknown number with Garand and pistol. Battalion, 59 killed, 314 wounded, 379 evacuated by wounds or disease. Japanese, estimated 800 killed. Myitkyina airfield, captured. Supply routes to China, secured. Strategic success. Individual marksmanship with precision rifle, largely irrelevant to operational outcome. July 1944. George returned to United States. Fort Benning, Georgia. Promoted to captain. Training duty. Teaching infantry officers lessons from Guadalcanal and Burma, but not teaching Winchester marksmanship. Teaching M1 Garand tactics, volume of fire, suppressive capability, mobile warfare doctrine appropriate to modern combat conditions. Winchester's fate, rifle remained in George's footlocker, rarely used. Pacific Islands being recaptured sequentially, American forces advancing. Need for individual marksmen with privately owned rifles was fading. Military standardizing around mass production, interchangeable parts, uniform equipment. Winchester represented previous era, craftsmanship, individual skill, civilian approach to military problem solving. 1947, George wrote, Shots fired in anger, 400+ pages, technical descriptions of weapons, ammunition, ballistics, tactics. Guadalcanal, extensively documented. Burma, briefly mentioned. George wrote honestly. Winchester had been extraordinary on Guadalcanal, mediocre in Burma. Different terrain demanded different weapons. Book became classic among firearms enthusiasts, still in print, still used as reference for Pacific War small arms. Post-war life. George discharged January 1947, Lieutenant Colonel, 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart, Combat Infantry Badge. Princeton University, graduated 1950, highest honors. Oxford, 4 years studying politics. British East Africa, 4 years studying regional institutions. State Department, consultant and lecturer on African affairs. Winchester Model 70, kept at home, rarely mentioned in professional life. Final resting place, Winchester donated to National Firearms Museum, Fairfax, Virginia. Display case with placard describing history. Most visitors walk past without stopping. Looks like any vintage hunting rifle. But it's not. It's the rifle that proved state champion marksmen could outshoot professionally trained military snipers on Guadalcanal. Rifle that proved obsolete in Burma mobile warfare. Rifle that documented transition from precision marksmanship era to semi-automatic volume of fire doctrine that defined modern infantry combat. John George died January 3, 2009, 90 years old. Winchester survived him, sits in museum as silent testimony that exceptional weapons are not exceptional in every context, that skills dominating one battlefield can fail on another, that modern war has no room for craftsman's approach when industrial-scale lethality determines outcomes. The rifle that killed 11 enemy snipers in 4 days on Guadalcanal fired only 3 times in 78 days in Burma. Same rifle, same shooter, different war. The Winchester Model 70 with synthetic stock was George's attempt to adapt the weapon to new realities. But no modification could change fundamental truth. Bolt-action precision had been superseded by semi-automatic volume. The rifle wasn't obsolete because it failed. It was obsolete because modern warfare had moved beyond what any single marksman with any single rifle could accomplish alone.